In this video, we are going to talk about the concept of host aliases, and we will see how to configure it in the DataPower. This is a DataPower administrator's job. So if you are a DataPower developer, you can completely skip this video. Let's try to understand the concept of host aliases first, and then we will see how to configure it practically in the DataPower. So here is the problem statement. As an administrator, you will have a DataPower appliance. It will have some Ethernet interfaces, and there are more than one. Each of these Ethernet interfaces will have some label. That label comes by default with the DataPower. So they are labeled like MGT0, ETH1, ETH2, ETH3. This label could be different in your DataPower appliance, but essentially these are the built-in labels. As an administrator, first you will have to think about which of these Ethernet interfaces you will use for what. For example, you can say that I'm going to dedicate the MGT0 Ethernet interface primarily for appliance management, and I'm not going to install any services on top of it. Maybe ETH2 you can go ahead and reserve for B2B services. Same way, you can reserve ETH3 for primarily API services. Once you decide their use, you get corresponding IP addresses from your network team and you assign those IP addresses over here. So far, so good. Now your appliance is ready and you can hand it over to developers. They can use this appliance to configure and install several services. Now look at it from a developer perspective. A developer comes in and he wishes to install or he wishes to create a B2B service. Good. So this service needs to have an IP address. Okay, you provided the IP address over here, isn't it? This 192.168.29.11 IP address is the one where developer is supposed to install the B2B services. So far, so good. But then the developer also wants to create an API service. So he will use 192.168.29.12. Okay, fine. Question is, how developer would know that this .11 is for B2B services and this IP address ending with .12 is for API services? Well, one way is that you send them email communication, but that's not a very good way of managing this. So to solve this problem, we have the concept of host aliases. What is a host alias? Essentially, a host alias is a triplet. It has an IP address, it will have a descriptive name, and then it will have some description. I'm sorry, here the IP address is mentioned as .59, it should be .50. But the concept is that you provide a short name and a description to an IP address. And this piece is visible to your developer when they need it. That's the whole idea. Similarly, I can have other host aliases defined as well for different IP addresses. Essentially, I'm giving a name to an IP address that will be visible to developers in an automatic manner, and they will be able to understand, oh, this is a B2B interface or this is an API interface just by looking at the name. They don't have to remember the IP addresses. Now that you have understood it, let's go back to the DataPower and check how we can implement it. You have to be in the default domain, and here you need to say host aliases. Under host alias, click on add button. Whatever IP address that you had, for example, the IP address that I had was 192.168.29.11. So I'm going to say here IP address as 192.168.29.11. That's my IP address. Under comments, I'm going to put reserved for B2B services. And here I'm going to provide a descriptive name, for example, B2B SVC interface. B2B SVC interface. Click on apply button. Your host alias is created successfully. You can click on host alias and you can see that this is part of the table now. You can save this. Fine. First piece is done. Host alias is configured. But then how these host aliases appear to a developer? Let's see that view. Let's go to a different application domain here. Here I have already an XML firewall. Let's go to that XML firewall and let's see how this appears. Here you can see that under local address, I'm supposed to provide the IP address where this service is installed. For a moment, assume this is for B2B gateway. Now, if I click on select alias, you can see here that the host alias that I configured along with its description and IP addresses appear. As a result, it is easier for developers to identify which IP address is for what purpose, and the chances of an error reduces a lot. This is the core concept of host aliases, and this is how they help developers in making the right choice for an IP address. That's all for the host alias. Thanks for watching.